Greetings! Today I will be sharing with you guys just a little bit about Textbook 101, some time-saving strategies for comprehension. Let's just go ahead and get started. So before we get into the tips, let's just chat for a little bit about what actually makes reading difficult. So some of the things that make reading difficult are just the difficulty with the concepts. We might not necessarily understand everything that's being talked about. Sometimes the concepts are unfamiliar or challenging, and a lot of times like the slower reader will have to be more engaged to actually fully understand. So just a simple example would be thinking about a magazine versus a textbook. So in a magazine, more than likely we're really familiar with what we're reading. There's lots of pictures, there aren't huge words, we're not learning new concepts of things. We're just looking, to engage in what's being shared. Now, a textbook is going to be introducing things that we may have never heard of before we actually picked up the textbook. So reading through the information could be dense and a little uninteresting, okay? Something else that makes reading more difficult is the level of vocabulary. So if the vocabulary used in what you're reading is unfamiliar to you, then the material will be harder to understand and your comprehension level will drop. Because think about it. If you're reading something that you don't understand or you have to stop and look up a word every few minutes, then you're not actually understanding what's going on. You're having to look up definitions to words, so it's just a little bit more difficult to understand what you're reading. Next up, some more of what makes reading difficult. The complexity of the style. Some people's style in writing is more difficult to engage with or to actually understand and comprehend. So think about it. With textbooks, many textbooks have longer sentences, and a lot of times they have more challenging grammatical components. Now you have to concentrate a lot more to actually understand what you're reading. So in those textbooks, we have authors who are less direct sometimes, and they implicate their main ideas. It's not just stated, right? So in fiction books or things like that, we know from the very beginning that's like what the point is, what we're reading. Whereas in textbooks or in books that are nonfiction, then we have to read for the meaning to actually try to read into what the person is really trying to say to us. So a lot of times we have to think more intensely than just leisurely reading through something. So then something else that makes it difficult is just our ability to use key techniques to efficiently read. And we'll talk about some of those key techniques in a little bit. Next up, it's important to know the purpose for reading. So there are four main purposes behind reading. Number one is to locate specific information. Number two will be to survey or gain an overview or actually review the information. Number three, for recreation and entertainment. Number four, to thoroughly understand and recall what you read. So as a student, you want to start out reading with a clear purpose in mind. You don't want to pick up a textbook and just start reading it. You want to understand exactly what you're reading for. What is the purpose behind your reading? So here's this lovely chart about efficient readers versus slow readers. So many of us would probably, if I asked a room full of you guys, if you consider yourself an efficient reader or a slow reader, your response would probably be, I'm an efficient reader. However, if I showed you this chart and then asked you if you were an efficient reader versus a slow reader, more of us would have to raise our hands as to be slow readers. So a lot of times we don't even recognize that we're a slow reader, but slow readers read everything the same. Okay? A lot of times our eyes will wander around the page. We don't actually practice reading because it's not a thing. Like who practices reading would be the question that we would ask. We have to reread sentences because sometimes we can't necessarily lose focus while we're reading. We have to go back and read something. We read things in their entirety, from front to the cover. And then slow readers also leave pages clean. They don't mark up their pages, all right? And then slow readers read one word at a time. And then they read words, like, oh, this word and this word and this word. Now, if we look over at efficient readers, we see that they're in juxtaposition with one another. Efficient readers, they adjust the speed of their reading to the actual need. So if they need to read 20 pages within a set amount of time, then they might read, if they have 20 minutes to read 20 pages, they might read a little bit quicker than if they had an hour to read those 20 minutes, to read those 20 pages, okay? And then efficient reader uses a pacer. They also practice speed reading. And practice speed reading is something that you can practice. You can improve on the speed in which you read. It's not a set thing. You don't have to be a slow reader forever, okay? So they keep reading, okay, and they don't go back and reread things. They keep reading, and then they fill in the gaps later. They read with the purpose. Goes back to, why am I reading this material? What do I want to get from it? They mark up their text. Efficient readers, they have the notes in the sidelines, the underlines, the circles. They mark up their text because it helps them better memorize or keep in their minds exactly what they read. They read multi-word phrases. They're not just reading the one word at a time. And they read ideas, okay? They pick out more than just words, all right? So next up, we're going to be talking about reading and decoding, okay? So guys, in college, I'm sure most of you guys know that it's not just reading, you have to comprehend what you're reading, and then you also have to know what you're reading for, and then with all that, you have to be able to analyze the material that you read. And then to read between the lines, to analyze, you have to read between the lines to look for deeper meaning, to see what it's actually talking about, okay? So in decoding for meaning, we're going to use context clues, okay? So looking for something that they might have said previously that helps us fully understand or get the meaning out of the text. And then reading for meaning, meaning we're not going to just read word for word. We're going to go back to what efficient readers do, and they read for ideas, okay? Now reading with a purpose. Read with a purpose, we're going to nail in this reading with a purpose today. You want to know what you're reading about and why you are reading it. It is extremely important. You don't want to sit down to read something for your history class and think that you're reading for homework when you're actually reading for a pop quiz that you have tomorrow. That might then change how you read and go over the information. So some comprehension tips for you guys. One, you want to create an interest. You don't want to, it's hard to sit down and read something that you're not interested in, that you have there's no part of you that actually wants to read it. So there are some tips to actually create the interest. You create the interest by setting goals. Again, what is my purpose? Why am I reading this material? And then also maybe asking yourself what you want to learn from what you're reading, okay? And something that you want to think about, how best you can take notes. Like, what would be the best way to take notes for this? Am I going to write in the margins? Am I going to get a separate sheet of paper out and take notes from each chapter? Am I going to type as I read it? Am I just going to go through and highlight the key things? So that's something else that can create interest. You want to learn the vocabulary. There are all types of words that you don't necessarily know the meaning of, but you learn via context clues. So make it a game. See a word, write it, jot it down, figure out if you got it right at the end of your reading by looking at the definitions, and that's a good way to learn some new vocabulary. And then something else, preview the reading. There's no better way to get excited about something than kind of skimming through to see, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn about this, and then knowing what you're going to learn about can pique your interest level, okay? And then review introductory information, right? So going back over what you already know or what's being discussed so that you can get a really good understanding of it, all right? So another comprehension tip would be to use what you already know by activating that prior knowledge. And then it's simple, asking yourself before you even start reading, what do I already know about the topic? And then asking yourself that question, that you can see if you remember as much as you thought you knew or what else you can learn from what you're reading now, okay? So that's just something really good to do. Something else. So we're now going to discuss creating a positive reading environment. So how do you create a positive reading environment? And then why is that even important? Well, it's important because your environment can help you. It can either help you or hurt you. It can help you stay focused, or it can prove to be a distraction. So you want to sit and read in a place where it's going to be relatively free of interruptions and distractions, right? Sometimes it's really good to study in the same place and at the same time of day. So then you have a routine, right? This is where I study, and then this is the time of day that I study. And then the time of day should be a good time, your prime time, where you're most alert. And studying right after lunch might not be the best time for you. So you want to choose a time where you're alert and you can take in the most information. You also don't want to be too comfortable. Being too comfortable leads to falling asleep. So sitting down to read in your bed might not be the best idea. So then just choosing a time and a place that goes back to choosing a time when you're mentally alert, prime time, choosing a time where you can focus the most. Okay, so creating a positive reading environment is important. And now we're going to talk about the SQ3R method. SQ3R. So some people have more R's than normal. Some people have the SQ4R method, but today we're going to share with you guys the SQ3R. So S, it's going to stand for summary. Survey. Not summary, it's going to stand for survey. So when you survey something, you're going to read the intro, look at the summary, skim the headings, look at the boldface. If there are pictures, check those out. Check the charts and the graphs. Check all those things out. Survey. Just look over, get a wide overview of what's going on. Then question. So this purpose. You want to set your purpose for reading. Why am I reading this material? Then you actually want to read it. And when you start to read, break it into sections. Don't just sit down and try to read through 100 pages in one sitting. Sit down, maybe break it up into chapter sections. I'm going to read this chapter, then stop, maybe take a few notes on it, make sure you understand what you read. So then recite. So recite the key information in your own words. If you can tell someone else what you just learned, then you have a much better handle on it than you think you do. So you want to be able to share what you just read, okay? Then review. So review, you want to scan the material, talk about it with some classmates if you can, look for themes and relationships between certain concepts. That's the SQ3R method. And it's really interesting. It was developed during World War II to help military personnel learn to read faster, okay, and they can be ready faster. So research shows that students who learn this system and use it, they end up reading 22% faster. See, you can in fact switch your reading style to be more of an efficient reader, okay? They also comprehend 10% more than people who don't use this method, and they retain about 80% of the material, whereas studies have shown that people who don't use this method, or people who do not use this method, as time progresses, then they lose information. They don't retain as much information as they would like, okay? Now, let's look into some of the specifics of survey. So the objective of surveying the chapter is, of course, to get a solid overview of what you're going to be reading. What it does is it prepares your mental processing system. So you might also be asking why. What is the purpose of surveying the chapter, okay? Or surveying whatever it is you're about to read. You're better able to concentrate when you have a frame of reference. And then you're able to locate and identify this important information that's easier to see. So you get a better understanding of something, a better comprehension, and you are better retaining information when you survey the material. Okay, and then think about it like this. So let's say that I have about an hour to read. I'm thinking that I only have an hour or so of reading to do tonight. However, after surveying the chapter or my material, I realized that it's actually going to be about 2 hours worth of reading versus the 1. So then you also can prepare your mind to sit down for the amount of time anticipated to do the reading. Okay. Now, survey applied to your studies. You want to think about this in general, just school in general. You want to start the semester or the term by looking at your learning contract or your syllabus and all the assignments that you have. So then you survey all of your work for the semester. Then you want to take note of like assigned terms and problems. You want to take note of those. Skim handouts when you get them. Just look through them to see exactly what type of work you're going to be expected to do. Make sure you read the introduction to things. If you have a book, you want to read the introduction. The introduction a lot of times will outline the entire book for you. So then you know that the book is set up this way, or this is what the book is going to discuss as a whole. So then sometimes you want to skim rapidly through the chapter, so that goes back to surveying, noticing the headings and visuals. And then it's really important to read if there is an overview of the chapter, then to read the overview or the summary of that chapter, and that'll help. And sometimes the introduction will do that for you. So those are just some ways that you can survey things that just aren't textbooks, but in general, okay? So now we're going to talk about just a few examples of ways you can actually read and discuss text. So because we're all going to read. However, in a lot of our classes, we're going to have to actually discuss the things that we read about. So everyone knows, or most of us know, the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. So it goes like this. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. So we're going to start by asking ourselves, what does this text say? Like, what does it say? The text says, it talks about the topic. What's the topic? The topic is of course, Mary and the lamb. Mary had the lamb that followed her everywhere. So then we want to move on to thinking about, well, what does this text do? Well, it talks about the story. Well, then what's the story? The story, this is a nursery rhyme that describes a pet that followed its mistress everywhere, okay? So then, so we just found out, so what the text says, is the topic. What the text does just talks about the story. So then moving on to what a text means, right? So we want to talk about the meaning within the story. So then looking into this, reading between the lines, analyzing this, you see that, this is a story about innocent devotion. This innocent devotion is conveyed by the lamb's close connection to his mistress. The devotion is emphasized by repetition that emphasizes the constancy of the lamb's actions. And then this notion of innocence is conveyed by the image of a young lamb. The lamb was white as snow. By making it seem that this connection between pet and mistress is natural and good, the nursery rhyme then asserts innocent devotion as a positive relationship. So when you read something, you want to maybe ask yourself, after you read it, you can answer this question, so what is this text actually saying? Okay? And then, so by saying this, then what does it do, right? It's describing this. So then after you know what it does, then what does it mean? The deeper meaning of exactly what we're reading. So those are just an example of a way to read and actually discuss text. So, reading strategies. So there are three things. There's something you do before, there's something you do during, and then there's things that you do after. So before, you want to establish a purpose. Guys, I shared with you guys, we're going to nail in this purpose. Establish a purpose. Why am I reading? And then you want to connect it to what you already know, your background knowledge. While you're reading, you want to use strategies to repair understanding and create meaning. Make sure that you understand, or make sure that you further develop your understanding of information to actually comprehend what's going on. Then after, you want to ask questions. You want to analyze the information. You want to be able to synthesize it so that you can form a deeper understanding of what's going on. So the before, the during, and the after, all three things that you need to do to improve your reading strategies. So then just some generic reading strategies that we can all do. You want to monitor comprehension. Make sure that you're actually understanding what you're reading and that you're not just reading it to fulfill an assignment. You want to pre-read, right? Pre-reading goes back to surveying the chapter, looking over the information. And then setting goals. What do I want to get from this reading today? Go back and think about what you already know, activating that previous knowledge. Ask some questions. I'm not sure I understand this, jot that down. That's a question you can ask a professor or have a conversation with some of your classmates. Make some predictions, okay? I think that this is what's going to happen at the end of this, or I'm pretty sure this is what this is actually about. Then after you make those predictions, test those predictions against the text. Like, well, I thought this, but this actually happened, or I thought this and it was right, okay? And then you want to go back and reread if you need to. Not rereading sentences after you've read them, but going back and, maybe reading over the chapter again to make sure that you fully understood it. And summarize. So after you finish reading, you want to be able to summarize the information, okay? That is really important. So next up we're going to talk about some strategies for specific disciplines. However, before we do that, we're just going to share these right here, right? So just overall, reading should build upon prior knowledge. In certain disciplines, you have a specialized vocabulary, right? So I'm not going to talk about integers in English class. However, I will discuss integers in mathematics class. So just knowing that certain disciplines have very specific vocabulary and things that don't necessarily cross over, okay? And then something else, you want to be able to learn how to deconstruct complex sentences, okay? So making sure that a sentence that's 2.5 lines long doesn't throw you for a loop, okay? You want to use your knowledge of text structures and genres to predict main and subordinate ideas. Then you want to ask discipline-relevant questions. So you don't want to show up to literature class asking a question about integers or fractions when that's not what we're discussing in literature class, okay? So you want to ask questions that are relevant to the class that you're in. Then you want to compare claims and propositions across text. For example, you don't want to show up to your English class asking a question about history. However, if you're in history class and you know that we're talking about World War II, then you might want to go and look at some other documents that discuss World War II to see if this information that they're talking about, someone else talks about, to see if it's accurate, okay? So those are just some strategies. Next up, we're going to talk about strategies specific to history. So in history, something that's helpful is visualizing. So putting yourself there, visualizing a historical account of a major battle in a war. It's like that is very beneficial while you're reading through history things. You want to infer. Look at historical portraits, and draw information from what you see. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure that this is happening, like looking at things, observing them, and then making your own predictions on what you see, okay? And then synthesizing. When you synthesize information, you compare and contrast like different texts about the same subject, and then make an argument in defense of your topic, okay? But you have to look at different texts to see. It's like, well, this says this, and this says this. But I think that this is more accurate because of what I read, okay? That's what synthesized information. Then questions. Asking questions in history is so important. It's considered one of the most effective strategies for history instruction. Most of the things that we know about history came about because of curiosity. Someone was curious what happened at this time. Someone wanted to delve further into someone's previous life, right? They were curious, so you want to ask questions. Then you want to determine the importance. You want to test your sources against other sources to make sure that it's valid. And then you also want to use contextualization within the time and the place, and then to compare conditions and events in other parts of the world at the time that your document was created. So think about it. Again, I'm going to use World War II as an example. So World War II, the entire world basically was involved in World War II. So let's say that an event happened that affected multiple countries. You're looking at an article from the United States about on this day that came out about this event. Because this is a world war, there might also be an article in the newspaper or something that came out in Germany or in France that also tells a story of what happened, okay? So you want to compare those events, if you can, to see to see if it's valid, to do a comparison on those events, to see like maybe with different perspectives. Well, this was the American perspective and this is the German perspective. So those are just ways that you can use reading strategies for history, okay? Next up, mathematics. So a lot of us are going to think, like, math, you don't necessarily have to read in math. However, you really do. You need in-depth comprehension strategies for math. And so you might be asking why. Because a lot of our math are text problems. We have word problems to solve in math. And sometimes in math there's vocabulary that we don't understand, so then we need the comprehension strategies to be able to define vocabulary in math, to interpret and understand word problems, because I know word problems for many people are some of the most difficult problems. And then just problem solving in general, which requires persistence and some critical thinking skills. So some more about mathematics. So for mathematics, we visualize, just like we do in history. You create word problem scenarios, or you can actually visualize the numbers, okay? Determine the importance based on the outlook of the word problem. That's a very important skill when you're reading through word problems, knowing which information it's important to know to solve the problem and what's just filler information. So inferring. You want to make predictions, of the meanings of words or things based on things that you actually know. So, and by doing that, you're predicting possible solutions. Making connections or schema. You connect the meaning of the problem with things that you already know, because we know that in math, everything builds on one another. And so you do that in order to understand and complete the assignment, okay? You want to make connections. Remember, this formula, I remember this formula and this is how we solve for this. Remember certain equations and things that you actually use often so that you can build on what you already know in math. Then you want to ask questions, right? Asking appropriate questions, though, about missing elements or things that's like, I'm not sure if I need this, like what exactly are we trying to find? What do I already know? Is this information relevant to solving this problem? So you want to ask those types of questions. And then synthesizing, right? So using the problem to dig for deeper meaning about the strategy or concept used to solve the word problem. And then you want to tie it to real world situations. So that's something that you do in mathematics. So literacy. In literacy, we make connections. It's all about making those connections. A lot of times those connections are bridges from our experiences to the actual text. Like I have a personal experience that relates directly to what this story is talking about. And then we want to think about bigger issues. So this text is discussing this, but it's pointing to a larger concept or a larger idea, okay? And then questioning. When we ask questions, we know that means we're self-monitoring. We're actually interacting with the text. You want to make sure they're authentic questions. And sometimes while you're asking those questions, think out loud and write down those thoughts. That helps you make sure you're actually connecting, that you're understanding what you're reading. And then in literacy, we're visualize and inferring. So it's like a lot of times in literacy classes, we're reading fiction books, and we can play them out like a movie in our mind. All right? And then when we infer things, inferring is basically just background knowledge plus the text clues, right? We use what we already know plus what the text tells us to make informed decisions about what we think is going to happen or what we felt like led up to what is happening in the text currently. So something else in literacy, you want to determine the importance of what is the most important thing in this topic. We want to highlight stuff like this. Highlight what you think is the most important thing, or highlight key phrases or words that will help you remember, okay? And then asking yourself, well, what does the author think is important? Because sometimes what we think is important is irrelevant if that's not what the author is actually trying to portray in the story that we're reading. And then synthesizing, okay? We're picking out the most important information and merging with it to create a response that's personal and factual, all right? And synthesize and put those pieces together. Now, science. Again, science is something else that a lot of people are like, there's not a lot of reading in science. However, there's strategies that you can use, all right? So you want to visualize in science as well. You have to be able to produce and organize information and data and graphic organizers or charts and tables. And you want to determine the importance. You know, in our science text, there are lots of information and things that are written out, but then you have to figure out, like, what exactly do I need to know from this information? What the explicit instruction of the features of nonfiction text, like what exactly is important from this? And then questioning. You have to, interpreting the data is all about asking questions, like, well, was this a control? Was this a variable? How did they do this? They conduct this experiment the right way. That's how you interpret data, by asking questions about the data you're presented with, okay? And then inferring, making predictions, coming up with some hypotheses when you're doing certain experiments. Synthesizing, using an observation journal to write about the big picture or conclude data, okay? So that's how we synthesize things in science class. Then, of course, activating our background knowledge. We can do this in science classes by doing picture walks to explicitly, like, teach certain vocabulary or comparing real events, you know, with the information that we're presented with, okay? So guys, that is all I have right now for Textbook 101. I shared with you guys just a few time-saving strategies that you all can use for comprehension. However, if you would like more information about ways to further improve your comprehension skills, please contact the University Academic Success Center. You can email us at uasc@uab.edu, or feel free to give us a call at 205-934-8184. Thank you so much, and I hope that you're going to be able to use some of these strategies for comprehension.